Greetings and welcome back to the next unit, How Brains Learn. In the previous unit, we reviewed the features of revised Bloom's taxonomy of cognitive domain. The revised Bloom's taxonomy was extensively dealt with in the earlier course, OBE and accreditation. So here we consider the knowledge from that is a prerequisite to this. We have just reviewed the Bloom's taxonomy in the previous unit. In this unit, the expected outcome: understand some features of brain and their role in teaching and learning. Obviously, the learning takes place between the ears, that is in the brain, and the job of the teacher is to change the brains of learners. Because if he's not changing any part of the brain, then his teaching is not effective. And as a teacher, it is good to know something about the structure and functioning of the brain and be familiar with current state of educational neuroscience. There is a lot of research that has been done in the past few decades, and right now huge number of scientists across the world are working in various aspects of the brain, because almost people consider it as the last frontier. To start with, for a non-specialist, the book by Sosa, D.A., How the Brain Learns, is a good starting point. It deals with the issues related to the brain at a very, very superficial level, but at the basic level. It is not going to get into the physiology or biology of the brain. Let us look at some findings that have come from brain research that are relevant to teaching and learning. The human brain continually reorganizes itself based on inputs. This process is called neuroplasticity, and it continues throughout one's life. There are some oddball sayings saying you can't teach a old dog new tricks. That's what some of the people who maybe crossed 40 years will keep saying, that don't try to teach me anything. We've learned whatever that is to be learned. I will live this way, which is not correct as far as the brain is concerned. One can learn right up to the age of right up to death. That means the brain has that neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity means new neurons can form and new connections between neurons can happen. And another misconception is that we can multitask. That is what many of the youngsters feel. They can do multitasking. Brain cannot multitask. What it is doing is, it is switching between tasks, which is a very inefficient process. Because every time you switch from one task to the other, it takes some time for it to get tuned into that task. If you shut it down, again it will take some time for it to get tuned into the new task. So our so-called multitasking is switching between tasks. So teacher as well as student should realize they cannot multitask. Brain is not designed to multitask. Emotions affect learning as well as memory and recall. We will expand a little more on that. Emotions always play a very dominant role in all aspects of teaching and learning. Movement and exercise improve mood. If you are physically active, if you have been doing exercises, it increases the brain mass and enhances cognitive processing. So one should always get involved in physical activities. For there, you always may find exceptions, but majority of the people should be doing some kind of exercises for uh, enhanced cognitive processing. Teaching and learning can be more difficult at certain times of the day. There are circadian cycles, that is, during the 24 hours, certain periods are not very conducive for the process of teaching and learning. If you try to have late night classes, which some of the colleges do, we have known some management institutions conducting classes sessions midnight, 12 o'clock, and so on. We do not know how effective they are, but they do that, and it will be in a less effective at least. Further, sleep deprivation and stress can affect learning and memory. Intelligence and creativity are two separate abilities. Don't mix the two, intelligence and creativity. And both can be modified by the environment and schooling. So creativity can be taught, intelligence also can be taught, but enhancing one alone does not automatically enhance creativity. Cultural and social climate affect teaching and learning. Arts can help develop the brain. That is the reason why in the NEP 2020, people have been asking, in the name of holistic learning, uh, something related to arts be incorporated into the curriculum. Okay. Now we'll try to know some basic facts about the brain. Human brain is a wet, fragile mass that weighs about 1.5 kg. I visited one lab where I got a chance to hold the actual brain in the hand in the laboratory. It represents only about 2% of the body weight and yet consumes nearly 20% of our calories that we acquire to burn. It consumes so much of energy. Okay. Roughly, this is a picture. I will not go through each and every item, what exactly it is, but it is good if you can spend some time on your own in understanding role of different parts of the brain in different activities. This is how the picture will be from the side. If you look at the main thing that you have to see, this is the occipital lobe. That means all the visual processing takes place in this part of the brain. And as you can see, it occupies a huge amount of area. So visual processing is very complex, and it is important. That's why it occupies so much of area. Then this part is called frontal lobe, and this is prefrontal cortex. That is right behind the forehead. You have prefrontal cortex, which is the most important for human beings. Of course, all others are important for various functions, but this is what makes the human or sapiens different from other organisms. And here inside, actually brain contains, one can say from evolution point of view, three parts. You have brain stem, and then you have limbic system, midbrain as you call it, and then the cortex. The midbrain or the limbic system consists of various parts where the emotions are also handled here, and very important parts of the thalamus, hypothalamus, amygdala, and hippocampus. We will not go through the details, which part is what and so on. But you can notice this is amygdala, which plays a interestingly very, very dominant role uh, in our controlling the attention, emotion, and our reactions and all that. Okay, let's now look at the frontal lobe. The part lying just behind the forehead is called prefrontal cortex. Known as the executive control center, deals with planning and thinking, monitors high order thinking, directs problem solving, and regulates the excesses of the emotional system. Also contains our self will area, what may be called our personality. It is the area where focus occurs because most of the working memory is located here. Memory has different parts, and one of the important ones is working memory. It is located in the prefrontal cortex. And what people now find, that is, if you have regular yoga practices, it has influence on prefrontal cortex, but it is a slow process. Over a period of time, it will give you your enhanced capability of decision making, problem solving, and so on. But developmentally, what happens is a 10 to 12-year gap in the development of frontal lobe compared to the other parts of the brain. And that is the reason why the emotional, you can translate that into this emotional maturity comes 10 to 12 years later than your what do you call reasoning capacity. And that is the reason why, and this happens by the time the frontal lobe fully matures, it is at the age of about 25 or so. That's why students at the age of 16, 17, they feel they know about the world. They have all the requirements to make decisions. And that is the reason why the young adults get involved in risky situations like fast driving, get into accidents, and they make very quick decisions. They think they understand life better than the older people, and so on and on. So, and either incidentally, the teachers of engineering students get involved with the students when their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. They're exactly dealing in the age of 17 to 21. Okay? And that is an extra caution that you have to make to ensure that the students do not get hurt because of this. Because that is a natural process. That is the prefrontal cortex evolving or taking more time for it to fully grow is a natural process. There is nothing you can do about it. Then the limbic system, it is nestled between brain stem and cerebrum. Cerebrum is the top part, and we said brain stem is below. It is between the two. Structures of limbic system are duplicated in each hemisphere. We have two hemispheres, so this is duplicated in both the places. It generates emotions and processes emotional memories because it's responsible for generating emotions. That means when an event occurs, whether it is pleasant or not pleasant, or it is threatening or acceptable, all that is decided by the limbic system. It manages the interplay between emotion and reason. Okay, so you cannot wish away the role of emotion in teaching and learning. The better we understand, we will be able to do better for the students. The two structures in the brain mainly responsible for long-term remembering are in the limbic system. Human brain, to get into other part of the brain, human brain has 1 trillion cells of two types: nerve cells and glial cells. Nerve cells are called neurons and are about 100 billion in number. It is very difficult to understand when you have something like 100 billion elements, what kind of complexity that can result from that. And on top of that, neurons you have 100 billion neurons, and each neuron can have up to 10,000 branches emerging from its core called dendrites. Okay? And they can form connections through dendrites, they can form connections with other neurons. So if you have 10,000 per neuron and you have 100 billion, you are talking of tens of trillions of connections. So if you have tens of trillions of elements, you can visualize the kind of complexity that can occur, or we cannot really visualize, in fact. And the role of glial cells is to hold the neurons together in one place and act as filters to keep harmful substances out of neurons, and also supply the required inputs to the neurons to function. Neurons constitute the functioning core of the brain, and every neuron will have one axon and a layer called myelin sheath that surrounds that axon. We'll take a look at a picture. This is a neuron, and it will have up to 10,000 of these dendrites, these kind of projections that come from that. And this is a nucleus. That means each neuron is one cell. A cell will always have a nucleus. And this neuron will have an axon like this, one axon, and this one is called myelin sheath. It is more like insulator to ensure the electrical signal passes through that fairly quickly without dissipating to the environment. And these are the terminals of the axon. Okay? So this is how the neuron looks like. And now here it shows that you have one neuron. It is connected at the dendrites here. How many cells it gets connected, how many connections will form between one neuron and the other, that is something that keeps evolving, that keeps changing the time. And the strength of connection also will keep changing with time. Okay? Now, the funny thing, the connection between, though the information gets transferred as electrical impulse from one neuron to the another. But actual connection is not electrical. The junction between, or rather synaptic junction is like this. Nerve impulse, when it comes from here, a signal comes here, it releases some neurotransmitter. It's a chemical. The junction between the two neurons is only chemical. It releases that, and this neurotransmitter will go to the next one. It passes through this, and it will get transferred as electrical signal again here. For example, if you are bitten by a snake venom will prevent it will affect the neurotransmitter creation. There won't be adequate neurotransmitter, and then the victim can go into convulsions because of that. Okay. So it is good to know in detail, and there are lots of things that happen. Several enzymes also get created, and they play a lot of role in this. There is no limit to the amount that you can learn, but there are enough number of enough amount of material that a non-specialist can understand and also make use of. A few facts. The dendrites of neurons receive electrical impulses from other neurons and transmit them along the axon. The myelin sheath insulates the axon from other cells and increases speed of impulse transmission. For example, the myelin sheath is kept healthy if you hydrate yourself. That is, if you take enough amount of water, the myelin sheath is kind of protected. That is the reason why people should keep drinking water at regular intervals. A neuron can transmit between 250 to 2500 impulses per second. Neurons have no direct contact with each other. The dendrite and synapses are separated by few nanometers. That is the distance between them. Electrical impulse is transferred from synapses to dendrites through neurotransmitters. Learning occurs by changing the synapses so that the influence of one neuron on another also changes. So what happens is, whatever your enhancement in the skills, let us say for example physical skills, like it all about music or sports and so on, the way the synapses, the number of connections that make the strength of connection and so on will depend on that. That is, if you are going to have higher and higher levels of skills, more and more these synaptic connections will get formed and they are controlled. And that is what is involved in improving your finer movements or practice. And if you don't practice again, you keep losing the strength of those connections. And amygdala is a tiny gland. It is in the limbic system and plays an important role in emotions, especially fear. It regulates the individual's interactions with the environment and can affect survival, such as whether to attack, escape, mate, or eat. It is believed that amygdala encodes an emotional message if one is present whenever a memory is tagged for long-term memory. Okay? And the issue with amygdala is whenever there is a sensory input that comes, especially the visual one comes, first it goes to, before it is visually processed in the occipital lobe, it goes faster to amygdala, and amygdala doesn't have to have all the information. It gets some cues and then reacts. And if it feels it not, if it is translated into negative thing, then the brain reacts very fast. It doesn't wait for any logical processing of the signals. That's why sometimes you get emotionally hijacked. People react emotionally very fast for some certain type of inputs and then may regret later. So one of the things about emotional hijacking is whenever you get emotionally hijacked, our elders over a period of time have sensed that they say count 10. That means you are giving time for logical processing of the inputs before you react. Don't react only by amygdala. That's the one, because there is about 20 to 30 milliseconds time difference between logical processing and amygdala processing for the emotion. Okay. And here, a teacher's capacity to humiliate, embarrass, reject and punish constitutes a perceived threat. For example, if students feel that somehow teacher has a tendency to humiliate, reject or any type of thing, then you lose the attention. They don't react to many things. Many students even see grading more as a punitive than a rewarding process. Somebody is judging you, he gives you a grade, that very process itself is seen as a kind of negative thing. Presence of a threat in any significant degree impedes learning. However mild it is, or if it is severe, it impedes learning. Teachers can make their classroom better learning environments by avoiding threats. You should religiously avoid any kind of threat in the classroom, even subtle intimidation. Then here, this is how the information processing model of the brain, you get, this is from the environment, by all the five senses, you get information continuously. It comes in, first of all, there is a sensory register. Each one kind of registers something, but everything that is here is not immediately processed, because your eyes keep on seeing so much from the environment. All that is not necessarily immediately processed. Only if it is required, it will focus on that. So some of it gets rejected straight away, and then it gets transferred to so-called intermediate memory. What stays here, what goes to the next stage, depends on the past experiences, and it is thrown out. That information is thrown out. Then the filtered one goes to the working memory. Working memory is small, not very large, and it can only process only a few bits of information. Whether it comes from the immediate memory or retrieved from the long-term memory of the brain, it comes onto this. It is processed consciously, and then it can be sent to storage. Okay, so the stages are sensory register, intermediate memory, working memory, and then long-term memory. These are the elements of the memory system. So the same I am explaining here. Information from the senses passes through the sensory register to short-term memory after the incoming information is filtered to determine how important it is. Sensory filtering. The filtering of the incoming information is dominantly done by past experience of the individual. Some, if you consider because of past experience irrelevant, it will reject straight away. The sensory register does hold sensory information for a very brief time, usually less than a second. The short-term memory includes immediate memory and working memory. Immediate memory in the model may be treated as a clipboard, a place where information is put briefly until a decision is made how to dispose it. Immediate memory operates subconsciously or consciously and holds data for up to 30 seconds. Threats and emotions affect processing the immediate memory. Students must feel physically safe and emotionally secure before they can focus on the content. Data affecting survival and data generating emotions are processed ahead of data for new learning. Always remember that. As a teacher, you should remember data generating emotions first gets processed, gets priority. How a person feels about learning situation determines the amount of attention devoted to it. Working memory is also a temporary memory and is a place where conscious processing occurs. When something is in working memory, which is very limited capacity, it has our focus and demands our attention. To slightly increase the size of the working memory, there are some exercises, there are some training programs offered at a school level. So you can slightly increase the size of the working memory, and if working memory is slightly larger, then one's ability to learn becomes much better. Information in working memory can come from the sensory, immediate memories or be retrieved from long-term memory. The limited capacity of working memory requires us to do chunking of information. That is the reason why you cannot put lots and lots of information and try to simultaneously process that. You have to chunk it. That is the way our brain is designed. And that is also the reason why packaging lessons into 15 to 20 minutes components is likely to result in maintaining greater student interest than one 40-minute lesson. Unfortunately, our present one is also about 40 minutes. Long-term memory, information is most likely to get stored if it makes sense and has meaning. Making sense means the learner can understand an item based on his or her experience. That is what, if it is not related to your experience or you can't make out your experience says that it is not relevant, then it doesn't make sense to you. Having meaning refers to whether the items are relevant to the learner. The same item is not likely to be equally relevant to all students in a classroom. Actually, memory gives us past and who we are and is essential to human individuality. For all practical purposes, the capacity of the brain to store information is unlimited. As of now, we consider with tens of trillions of connections possible, the capacity of the brain is considered unlimited. If the pattern is, what happens is a stimulus causes a group of neurons to fire together. And the firing may last only for a brief time, a standby period. If the pattern is repeated during the standby period, through rehearsal and practice, the tendency for the associated group to fire together is increased. That means strength of connection increases. The neuronal patterns of firing together, it is called engram. These individual engrams associated and form networks again. They get connected together. And so if any part of this network is triggered, the whole network is not only strengthened. If one is triggered, the whole memory is retrievable. With all the associated information, it is retrievable. Once again, learning and retention are different. And I'm sure as a teacher, you would have experienced that when you are talking about a course in the, let us say, 5th or 6th semester, about material that is offered in 2nd semester, even for students who got A grade in that, may not be able to recall completely because they've learnt it at that time, but they have not retained it appropriately. So learning and retention are two different things, and learning does not always involve long-term retention. Retention refers to the process of whereby long-term memory preserves learning in such a way that it can locate, identify and retrieve it accurately in the future. So some guidelines for the teachers. For good retention, teach students rehearsal activities and strategies. Remind students to continuously practice rehearsal strategies until they become regular parts of their study and learning habits. Keep rehearsal relevant. Teachers' experiences may not be relevant to students because each one has traversed different paths. Remember that time spent alone is not a trustworthy indicator of the effectiveness of the rehearsal. Generally, it is good to do it together. Provide more visual and contextual clues to make rehearsal meaningful and successful. We will be spending more time on this aspect later. Okay, that in the next unit, we will try to talk about what is instruction and its elements. Okay, thank you very much for your attention.